Good morning. And I know everybody knows where we are in the Bible today, right? We've got a good group of people here that look like they're refreshed after spring break and energized. That response was not too encouraging, since in the video I told you where we're going to be this week. So Exodus chapter 33. We're continuing our series on great prayers of the Bible, and we are picking up with the people of Israel after the golden calf experience. Chapter 32 is the golden calf experience. Now remember, this is all after God called Moses, after the Ten Commandments, after the plagues. The people are in the wilderness and they get impatient, they lose their focus, and they begin, Exodus 33, they begin worshiping a golden calf, and God has to get their attention, and something pretty interesting happens once that takes place. The people of Israel still have a relationship with God. God still has a purpose for them, but Moses sets up a tent of meeting. That's what it's called, a tent of meeting. It's basically the beginning of the tabernacle, but it's a provisional tabernacle. Just as a little trivia question, real quick, just to see who's paid attention in the last 7 or 8 years. What does the word tabernacle come from? It means what?
Tent.
I've heard tent, I've heard meeting place. It actually comes from the verb to dwell. To dwell. Jesus, when it said the word became flesh and dwelt among us, it's that same word going back to basically saying that Jesus tabernacled with us. So God's dwelling with his people, but here's the problem. God says to them in verse 2 of chapter 33, I will send, my tongue's still on spring break, I will send an angel ahead of you and will drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you because you are a stiff-necked people. Otherwise, I might destroy you on the way. And what was the people's reaction? When the people heard this bad news, they mourned and didn't put on their jewelry. For the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I went up with you for a single moment, I would destroy you. You think about the worst behaved child you have ever seen. On our trip, we stopped at Waffle House and had sort of a brunch. And there was a child in there that I don't know what his mama was thinking, but imagine being in a Waffle House and he was laying down on the floor. I love these sound effects. He was laying down on the floor, just basically having a little tantrum. And mama just sat there and watched him. So think about the worst behaved child you've ever seen. And your thought, if this were my child, this would be the last day of their life. You've said that about somebody. And that's what God's saying here. You don't want me too close to you, because if I'm dwelling with you, you are going to be destroyed. And so what we saw was the Israelites remained stripped of their jewelry from Mount Horeb onward. Why is that significant?
I was just thinking that question in my head.
Are they that
I
attached?
really was. I was thinking, what's the significance of the jewelry?
Chapter 32,
Thank you.
the golden calf. And so it's that connection. But so God's wanting them to be different, wanting them to be separated. And that jewelry is reminding them of the golden calf. So what did Moses do? Verse 7 tells us about the tent of meeting. Now Moses took a tent and pitched it outside the camp. At a distance from the camp, he called it the tent of meeting. And this next part's really important. Anyone who wanted to consult the Lord would go to the tent of meeting that was outside the camp. So their relationship with God has been damaged. Moses says, we're still going to have a relationship with God, but when it says that Moses pitched it outside the camp, at a distance from the camp, it's basically saying far off. You had to make an effort. If you wanted to consult God, there was going to be an effort on your part. It wasn't going to be an act of convenience. Notice verse 8 says, whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would stand up, each one at the door of his tent, and they would watch Moses until he entered the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud, that pillar of cloud that they were following at the daytime, the pillar of cloud, let me find my place again, would come down and remain at the entrance to the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. As all the people saw the pillar of cloud remaining at the entrance to the tent, they would stand up, then bow in worship, each one at the door of his tent. So the people are involved, even though God's at this distance from them. Why is that pillar of cloud necessary? Why is it necessary for it to descend? It's already there. They can already see it. God's affirming to them that he is communicating with Moses. He wants all of them to know that. It reminds me of Pentecost. And at Pentecost, remember what happened? They heard the sound of rushing wind. They'd all been told to wait for the Spirit. That word Spirit is from a word for breathe or a word for wind. And so that was going to be an immediate connection in their mind to say, hey, this is the promised Spirit that's coming now. And remember what else? What could they see at Pentecost? Tongues of fire resting on their heads. Now, you saw that on other people. That was important too, because God didn't want one group saying, well, what happened at Pentecost was those who spoke this language received the Spirit, or those with this background received the Spirit, those from this place received the Spirit. God wanted them all to understand the Spirit has come to all of you who are my children. So here, God's basically wanting them to know this communication makes a difference. This is real communication. Notice verse 11. I love this verse. The Lord would speak with Moses face to face, just as a man speaks with his friend. I bet at some point this week you've had a conversation with somebody that would not make eye contact with you. That the whole time they were looking at their phone, they were watching TV, they were driving and looking at the road. That might be okay. But, you know, you've heard me say before, we know if Guanya's mad and doesn't want to communicate because she just won't look at us. But here, God is having a face-to-face conversation. Now, we know that he couldn't actually really look on God's face, right? So what it's saying is he was having true fellowship with God. You've had conversations with people where you know that they were invested in what you were saying, right? Every single day, right? Maybe not. But look, it says, just as a man speaks with his friend. And then we get into the prayer. Actually, what Moses said. Look at what Moses said in verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, "Look, you have told me, lead this people up, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You said, I know you by name, and have also found favor with me. Now, if I have indeed found favor with you, please teach me your ways, and I will know you, so that I may find favor with you. Now consider that this nation is your people." What's he asking God there? He's saying to God, God, I want to know you. I don't want a program. I don't want an agenda. I want to know you. Then God's response is, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. When we see that word rest, what do we think about? We think about 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, taking a Sunday afternoon nap, right? But that word rest really means more than that. It means spiritual ease. It means fighting, a lack of fighting, I mean. God says, I'm going to be with you. But look at what Moses says in verse 15. What a great statement for all of us to make. If your presence does not go, don't make us go up from here. I'm not going without you. Then he says, how will it be known that I and your people have found favor with you unless you go with us? I and your people will be distinguished by this from all the other people on the face of the earth. Now what's Moses saying? I don't want to go without you. He's saying also, I don't want to go unless you're glorified. You see, he's not just concerned about the reputation of the people. He's concerned about God's reputation. He's concerned about glorifying God. The Lord answered Moses in verse 17, I will do this very thing you have asked for you have found favor with me, and I know you by name. Moses gets assurance. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be glorified through your people. I'm going to give you rest. I'm going to show you my favor. And then what does Moses say? God, you've promised to be with me. You've promised to give us what we've asked. But God, I want something else. He says, God, please let me see your glory. Think about that for a moment. We're in chapter 33 of Exodus. What has Moses already seen? A burning bush, the parting of the Red Sea, the plagues. You know, I'd have been done after that shepherd's rod turned into a serpent. But he's saying, God, I want more of you. I want to see your glory. I want to know you as well as I can possibly know you. What a beautiful description of prayer that is. Are we seeking for God to just do what we need done in our lives? Or are we seeking God? Listen to what God says. I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you. What did Moses ask to see? His glory. God says, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim the name the Lord before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he added, you cannot see my face, for humans cannot see me and live. The Lord said, here is a place near me. You are to stand on the rock, and when my glory passes by, I will put you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face will not be seen. Moses says, I want to see God's glory. I've seen a lot. Think about what all he's seen. God says, I will show you my goodness. You're going to see my glory in my actions. God's glory is seen in his goodness. God's saying to Moses, you've seen so much supernatural already. While we're having this conversation, I've got a pillar of cloud that I'm controlling. And it's affirming the fact that we're having this conversation. Don't get hung up on some type of supernatural experience. Get hung up on my goodness. Get hung up on my hand being at work in your life. God's goodness reflects his glory, which reminds us too that if we are showing God's goodness, we are glorifying God. If we're not showing God's goodness, we're not glorifying God. God's grace. We know that grace is unmerited favor. You can't deserve it. You can't earn it. It just so happened while we were in Florida, I read a devotional, the daily devotional that I get by email from Dr. Merritt. And he talked about an author who wrote about their adopted child. And just like Gwanya, she was a child who had been part of an international adoption. And after some events, just like Gwanya, she was adopted a second time by a different family. And they were going to Disney World. This family had, I think it was 3 biological children and an adopted child. And as they got close to their Disney trip, the girl started acting out. She was the worst behaved they had ever seen her. And when they tried to talk to her to understand what was going on, she said, well, you're not taking me to Disney. Apparently, the family that she had been adopted into before, and I may have just messed the story up, it may have been that first family that had the other biological children, because the first family that this girl lived with was adopted by, that family took their biological children to Disney but didn't take her. So she thought the same thing was going to happen. And so as they explained to her, you're going, you're part of our family, it doesn't matter. She still didn't know what to believe. But then she went to Disney. And she told them at Disney, I get it now. I'm not going to Disney because I'm good. I'm going to Disney because I'm yours. And I thought, isn't that the Christian life? We can't be good enough. God's grace has made it possible for us to experience Him, to know Him, and to experience heaven ultimately. So God's grace is what God's promising. You and your people have found favor. I'm going to show grace. The God who is capable of destroying you is able to show you grace. If Wes Cochran was in a hurry to get home after church today and was dying to get into that Sunday dinner that Jenny got up and prepared this morning, then let's say he gets pulled over by one of Brandon's finest. And we know this could never happen. But he gets pulled over by one of Brandon's finest, and they don't give him a ticket. But let's say as Wes is racing home, he gets a text from Rodney that says, you must be going about 20 miles over the speed limit. Well, Rodney just sends him a text. Rodney can't give him a ticket, right? But which is he going to be more thankful for? That Rodney didn't give him a ticket, or that one of Brandon's finest didn't give him a ticket? He didn't have to worry about Rodney, right?
I was worried about his safety.
That's right. So, the one who could destroy them is showing them grace. But then, we also see God saying, I want you to be on this rock, and when my glory passes by, I will put you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face will not be seen. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock. That's the hymn we talked about last week. God's hand is there. God's going to walk by. Let him see his goodness. But God's hand is going to be there to shield him so he's not harmed by the presence of God. But God's hand is also going to be there to say, my hand is on you. My hand will be with you. God's grace is reflected in God's grip. We are in his hands. His grip is a firm grip. His grip holds on to us. Do you like being in somebody's grip? Would it depend on whose that is? You know, this past week I listened to a lady a lot, or at least a lady's voice. Some of you are wondering, what is he about to say? It was that voice on the GPS. And it was different than what I remembered from a lot of GPS times, because this person never corrected me when I did wrong. You know, usually it would say something like rerouting, which is just GPS language for, you dummy, why can't you follow directions? I missed a turn yesterday, and it just recalculated it without telling me I did anything wrong. But it was so persistent at telling me what to do that I would occasionally say, please. I never could get the GPS to say please. Go past this light and take a left at the next light. Never once did it ever say please. Sometimes we chafe at being told what to do, don't we? But God wants us to know when we seek his face, we can trust his hand. His grip is going to be there with us to guide us, to protect us, to keep us close to him. That's his promise for us.